Okay, so when we think about a market economy, what usually comes to mind? Buyers and sellers, supply and demand, all that stuff. But there's this other institution that's so common, so everywhere, that we barely even notice it. And yet, it's pretty much the secret ingredient to the market's success. I'm talking about the business firm.
But that right there brings up a really fascinating puzzle. We're always told how incredibly efficient markets are, right? There are these amazing mechanisms for coordinating human activity. So if that's true, why do firms even exist? Why don't we just use market contracts for every single task we need done? This question, it gets right to the very heart of how our economy actually works.
And this puzzle really has two sides to it, which is what makes it so interesting. On the one hand, we've seen historically that large-scale central planning tends to be a disaster. So how can a firm, which is kind of like a little island of central planning, be so successful? But then, on the other hand, if markets are so brilliant, why bother creating these big complex organizations in the first place, instead of just using contracts for everything?
All right, to crack the first half of this puzzle, we've got to jump in a time machine and go all the way back to the early 20th century. There was this huge, famous debate kicked off by an economist named Ludwig von Mises. It's known as the socialist calculation debate, and it's absolutely key to understanding why you can't just run an entire economy like one giant company.
The core idea here, the real linchpin, is something called economic calculation. See, in a market, money prices aren't just random numbers. Think of them more like signals, packed with critical information about what's scarce and what people actually value. Businesses use these price signals to calculate profit and loss, which is what tells them, hey, are we actually creating value here, or are we just wasting resources?
So the big point Mises made was this. Under state socialism, the government owns all the means of production, the factories, the machines, all the resources. Well, if there's no private ownership of those things, you can't have real markets for them. And if you don't have markets, you can't get meaningful prices. And without prices, the planners are basically flying blind. They have literally no way to rationally calculate whether building a new railroad is a better use of steel than, say, building a new bridge.
As Mises himself put it pretty bluntly, without market prices, the very possibility of rational economic calculation is, quote, unthinkable. It's as simple as that. You just can't plan an economy if you have no way to calculate.
Okay, so a centrally planned economy fails because it lacks market prices. Boom, first puzzle solved. But that just makes our second puzzle even more of a head-scratcher, doesn't it? If markets and their prices are so vital, why do we organize so much of our production inside firms, away from the direct influence of the market?
Well, the answer is one of those things that's surprisingly simple, yet it was totally revolutionary when it was first figured out. It's this. Using the market itself isn't free. Every single time you have to find a contractor, negotiate a price, write up a contract, and make sure the work gets done right, all of that takes time and resources. Economists have a name for this: transaction costs.
And this is where the firm comes in as a, frankly, more efficient solution a lot of the time. Instead of juggling countless little contracts, you just hire an employee with one open-ended agreement. Suddenly, it's way easier to coordinate teams, build up specialized knowledge, and create the stability you need for complex projects. The firm exists simply because, in many cases, it's just plain cheaper than using the market.
So now we can put it all together and get the standard answer. How can a firm, this little island of planning, succeed where a giant socialist state fails? It's because the firm operates within a vast sea of markets. It buys its raw materials, it rents its office space, it hires its labor, all from the market, using those crucial price signals to make its own internal plans. But hold on, because the story doesn't stop there. The relationship is actually way, way deeper than that.
And this is where we get to the real aha moment of this whole thing. It's not just that firms exist alongside markets. No. The two are fundamentally tangled up with a couple of other super important institutions. Together, they form this inseparable nexus, really, that makes our entire modern economy possible. The firm, money, and private property. These three aren't just separate features of an economy. They are a single, interconnected system where one literally cannot function without the others. You pull one out, and the whole thing comes tumbling down.
Let's just trace the logic here, step by step. You start with private property. That allows for real markets. Those markets generate money prices. Those money prices make economic calculation possible. And here's the kicker. Where does all this crucial calculation actually happen? Inside the firm. So you see, the firm isn't just using the market signals, it's the primary engine for market calculation.
But wait, this brings up another kind of tricky question.
A firm can easily look at the market price for steel it needs to buy. But what about the cost of using a machine it bought 5 years ago? There's no direct market transaction happening right now. How in the world does it assign a cost to that? This is a really interesting challenge, and it's known as the imputation problem.
So for any inputs the firm gets through a contract, things it hires or rents, the cost is the objective market price. Easy. But for the stuff the firm already owns, the cost is subjective. It has to be estimated based on its value and alternative uses. It's a calculated guess of its opportunity cost.
And here it is, the final piece of the puzzle. What institution provides the stable framework needed to make these really difficult subjective calculations day in and day out? You guessed it, the firm itself. It's the firm's accounting practices, its internal rules, and its management structure that create the conventions necessary to solve this imputation problem and make rational calculation possible.
So why does all of this matter? Who cares about all this theory? Well, it matters a lot. Because understanding this institutional nexus helps us understand the very engine of economic prosperity. This isn't just some abstract idea from a textbook, it's about the real world, nuts and bolts process of how wealth actually gets created.
Here's a great way to think about it. Money is the language of the market. And a profit and loss statement? That's the business's report card. It's a super simple, brutally honest signal that tells a business and the wider economy if it's using resources effectively to meet people's needs. So the big takeaway here is that these institutions form an inseparable system for guiding production. The profit and loss signals it generates are how successful ventures peacefully displace unsuccessful ones, constantly redirecting resources to where they're valued most. And it really shows how connected the whole system is. If you damage one part, say you undermine money through inflation, you damage the entire system's ability to calculate and create wealth.
And that leaves us with a final and pretty important question to ponder. Our entire modern economy is built on this intricate and interconnected institutional nexus of firms, money, and property. And once you really see how deeply connected they all are, it forces us to ask, just how fragile is this foundation that we all depend on?